Hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog. And today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, starting with part 2, chapter 8. But first, but today we are reading Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, starting with part 2, chapter 8. What happened last time? Well, some things happened last time. So we talked about the different circles of high society that Anna is part of in St. Petersburg. And she talks about her favorite ones and she talks about the overlap that she has with Vronsky. And Vronsky is talking, and of course, one of his cousins is friends with Anna because everybody is in some way connected. We have learned this. But that friend or that cousin, Betsy, has a party and both Anna and Vronsky are invited. And before Anna or Vronsky shows up, are these like little sprigs of gossip that we get about Anna and about her marriage, and that it's like, oh well, like this is what I've heard, or like things just haven't really been the same since she's come back from Moscow, like I'm wondering what happened, like those types of things. And she shows up, Vronsky shows up, and they like sort of seclude themselves from the rest of the party and are talking sort of like on the outskirts of the room. And Vronsky is just like proclaiming his love and is saying there are two options here. We can either be together and be very happy, or we don't be together and we'll just be sad and miserable. You just have to tell me to go away. And she doesn't explicitly say it. And so when she's leaving, Vronsky is like, "Yes, I'm chipping away at this, and I will eventually end up with her." Mwahahaha. And that's where we've ended. So let's do it. Here we go. Chapter 8. Alexei Alexandrovitch had seen nothing striking or improper in the fact that his wife was sitting with Vronsky at a table apart, in eager conversation with him about something. But he noticed that to the rest of the party this appeared something striking and improper, and for that reason it seemed to him, too, to be improper. He made up his mind that he must speak of it to his wife. On reaching home, Alexey Alexandrovitch went to his study, as he usually did, seated himself in his low chair, opened a book on the papacy at the place where he had laid the paper knife in it, and read till 1 o'clock, just as he usually did. But from time to time he rubbed his high forehead and shook his head, as though to drive away something. At his usual time he got up and made his toilet for the night. Anna Arkadyevna had not yet come in. With a book under his arm, he went upstairs. But this evening, instead of his usual thoughts and meditations upon official details, his thoughts were absorbed by his wife and something disagreeable connected with her. Contrary to his usual habit, he did not get into bed, but fell to walking up and down the rooms with his hands clasped behind his back. He could not go to bed, feeling that it was absolutely needful for him first to think thoroughly over the position that had just arisen. When Alexey Alexandrovitch had made up his mind that he must talk to his wife about it, it had seemed a very simple and easy matter. But now, when he began to think over the question that had just presented itself, it seemed to him very complicated and difficult. Alexey Alexandrovitch was not jealous. Jealousy, according to his notions, was an insult to one's wife, and one ought to have confidence in one's wife. Why one ought to have confidence, that is to say, complete conviction that his young wife would always love him, he did not ask himself. But he had no experience of lack of confidence, because he had confidence in her and told himself that he ought to have it. Now, though his conviction that jealousy was a shameful feeling and that one ought to feel confidence had not broken down, he felt that he was standing face to face with something illogical and irrational, and did not know what was to be done. Alexei Alexandrovitch was standing face to face with life, with the possibility of his wife's loving someone other than himself, and this seemed to him very irrational and incomprehensible because it was life itself. All his life, Alexei Alexandrovitch had lived and worked in official spheres, having to do with the reflection of life. And every time he had stumbled against life itself, he had shrunk away from it. Now he experienced a feeling akin to that of a man who, while calmly crossing a precipice by a bridge, should suddenly discover that the bridge is broken, and that there is a chasm below. That chasm was life itself, the bridge, that artificial life in which Alexei Alexandrovitch had lived. For the first time, the question presented itself to him of the possibility of his wife's loving someone else, and he was horrified at it. He did not undress, but walked up and down with his regular tread over the resounding parquet of the dining room, where one lamp was burning, over the carpet of the dark drawing room, in which the light was reflected on the big new portrait of himself hanging over the sofa and across her Bordeaux, were 2 candles burning, lighting up the portraits of her parents and woman friends, and the pretty knickknacks of her writing table that he knew so well. He walked across her Bordeaux to the bedroom door and turned back again. At each turn in his walk, especially at the parquet of the lighted dining room, he halted and said to himself, "Yes, this I must decide and put a stop to. I must express my view of it and my decision." And he turned back again. But express what? What decision? He said to himself in the drawing room, and he found no reply. But after all, he asked himself before turning into the Bordeaux, what has occurred? Nothing. She was talking a long while with him, but what of that? Surely women in society can talk to whom they please, and then jealousy means lowering both myself and her, he told himself as he went into her Bordeaux. But this dictum, which had always had such weight with him before, had now no weight and no meaning at all. And from the bedroom door he turned back again. But as he entered the dark drawing room, some inner voice told him that it was not so, and that if others noticed it, that showed that there was something. And he said to himself again in the dining room, "Yes, I must decide and put a stop to it, and express my view of it." And again, at the turn in the drawing room, he asked himself, "Decide what?" And again, he asked himself, what had occurred? And answered, "Nothing," and recollected the jealousy was a feeling insulting to his wife. But again, in the drawing room, he was convinced that something had happened. His thoughts, like his body, went round a complete circle without coming upon anything new. He noticed this, rubbed his forehead, and sat down in her Bordeaux. There, looking at her table, with a malachite blotting case lying at the top and an unfinished letter, his thoughts suddenly changed. He began to think of her, of what she was thinking and feeling. For the first time he pictured vividly to himself her personal life, her ideas, her desires, and the idea that she could and should have a separate life of her own seemed to him so alarming that he made haste to dispel it. It was the chasm which he was afraid to peep into, To put himself in thought and feeling in another person's place with a spiritual exercise not natural to Alexei Alexandrovitch. He looked on his spiritual exercise as a harmful and dangerous abuse of the fancy. And the worst of it all, thought he, is that just now, at the very moment when my great work is approaching completion, he was thinking of the project he was bringing forward at the time, when I stand in need of all my mental peace and all my energies, just now this stupid worry should fall foul of me. But what's to be done? I'm not one of those men who submit to uneasiness and worry without having the force of character to face them. I must think it over, come to a decision, and put it out of my mind, he said aloud. The question of her feelings, of what has passed and may be passing in her soul, that's not my affair. That's the affair of her conscience, and falls under the head of religion, he said to himself, feeling consolation in the sense that he had found to which division of regulating principles the new circumstance would be properly referred. And so, Alexei Alexandrovitch said to himself, questions as to her feelings and so on are questions for her conscience, with which I can have nothing to do. My duty is clearly defined. As the head of the family, I am a person bound in duty to guide her, and consequently, in part, the person responsible. I am bound to point out the danger I perceive, to warn her, even to use my authority. I ought to speak plainly to her. And everything that he would say tonight to his wife took clear shape in Alexei Alexandrovitch's head. Thinking over what he would say, he somewhat regretted that he should have to use his time and mental powers for domestic consumption, with so little to show for it. But in spite of that, the form and contents of the speech before him shaped itself as clearly and distinctly in his head as a ministerial report. I must say and express fully the following points. First, exposition of the value to be attached to public opinion and to decorum. Secondly, exposition of religious significance of marriage. Thirdly, if need be, reference to the calamity possibly ensuing to our son. Fourthly, reference to the unhappiness likely to result to herself. And interlacing his fingers, Alexei Alexandrovitch stretched them, and the joints of the fingers cracked. This trick, a bad habit, the cracking of his fingers, always soothed him and gave precision to his thoughts, so needful to him at this juncture. There was a sound. There was the sound of a carriage driving up to the front door. Alexei Alexandrovitch halted in the middle of the room. A woman's step was heard mounting the stairs. Alexei Alexandrovitch, ready for his speech, stood compressing his fingers together, waiting to see if the crack would not come again. One joint cracked. Already from the sound of light steps on the stairs, he was aware that she was close, and though he was satisfied with his speech, he felt frightened of the explanation confronting him. End of chapter 8. Ooh, okay, so I actually really liked this chapter. And this is the first time that we have alone time and are more in the head of Anna's husband, Alexei. And so he has left the party already. Anna has stayed for dinner. And so he goes into his study. He reads until 1 o'clock, like usual. And he heads upstairs, and she is still not there yet. And instead of like undressing and getting ready for bed, he's pacing back and forth because he knows, well, he knows that Anna and Vronsky were talking, and that is not weird to him or improper to him at all. But other people are thinking that it's weird and improper. So because the other people are thinking that it's weird and improper, he is like, all right, well, now I think it's weird and improper. So now he has that feeling like, oh, okay, well, maybe it is weird and improper. This is what I need to say to Anna. And so he's going back and forth about like, no, like I'm not jealous because jealousy just insults both of us. and just like, what am I going to say? Why do I have to say anything? And he's pacing back and forth. And so we get the idea of like when he, walks to one end of the room, he has one idea. And then when he turns to go to the other end, he has another idea, a conflicting idea. So by the time the carriage actually pulls up, he knows what he's going to say, and he knows, like, he feels confident in how he's going to bring this up. But what he's worried about is what she's going to say. Love that. It's so good. Yeah. It's so good. And in just like being with him on his back and forth, like it just gives him more depth. Like you're not like, oh, he's just some, nameless husband soldier who very clearly has these stereotypes of what we already associate with his standing. So that's pretty cool. I like that. The self the self-doubt, but also the confidence that he has, and how that is like butting heads is really nice. I like that. Chapter 9. Anna came in with hanging head, playing with the tassels of her hood. Her face was brilliant and glowing, but this glow was not one of brightness. It suggested the fearful glow of a conflagration in the midst of a dark night. On seeing her husband, Anna raised her head and smiled as though she had just waked up. "Oh, you're not in bed? What a wonder," she said, letting fall her hood, and without stopping, she went on into the dressing room. "It's late, Alexey Alexandrovitch," she said, when she had gone through the door. "Anna, it's necessary for me to have a talk with you." "With me?" she said wonderingly. She came out from behind the door of the dressing room and looked at him. "Why, what is it? What about?" she asked, sitting down. "Well, let's talk if it's so necessary, but it would be better to get to sleep." Anna said what came to her lips, and marveled, hearing herself, at her own capacity for lying. How simple and natural were her words, and how likely that she was simply sleepy. She felt herself clad in an impenetrable armor of falsehood. She felt that some unseen force had come to her aid and was supporting her. "Anna, I must warn you," he began. "Warn me?" she said. "Of what?" She looked at him so simply, so brightly, that anyone who did not know her as her husband knew her could not have noticed anything unnatural, either in the sound or the sense of her words. But to him, knowing her, knowing that whenever he went to bed 5 minutes later than usual, she noticed it, and asked him the reason. To him, knowing that every joy, every pleasure and pain that she felt, she communicated to him at once. To him, now to see that she did not care to notice his state of mind, that she did not care to say a word about herself, meant a great deal. He saw that the inmost recesses of her soul, that had always hitherto lain open before him, were closed against him. More than that, he saw from her tone that she was not even perturbed at that, but as it were said straight out to him, "Yes, shut up, and so it must be, and will be in the future." Now he experienced a feeling such as a man might have, returning home and finding his own house locked up. But perhaps the key may yet be found, thought Alexey Alexandrovitch. "I want to warn you," he said, in a low voice, "that through thoughtlessness and lack of caution, you may cause yourself to be asked about in society. Your too animated conversation this evening with Count Vronsky," he enunciated the name firmly and with deliberate emphasis, "attracted attention." He talked and looked at her laughing eyes, which frightened him now with their impenetrable look, and, as he talked, he felt all the uselessness and idleness of his words. You're always like that, she answered, as though completely misapprehending him, and of all he had said only taking in the last phrase. One time, you don't like my being dull, and another time you don't like my being lively. I wasn't dull. Does that offend you? Alexey Alexandrovitch shivered and bent his hands to make the joints crack. Oh, please don't do that. I do so dislike it, she said. Anna, is this you? Said Alexey Alexandrovitch, quietly making an effort over himself and restraining the motions of his fingers. But what is it all about? She said, with such genuine and droll wonder. What do you want of me? Alexey Alexandrovitch paused and rubbed his fingers and his eyes. He saw that instead of doing as he had intended, that is to say, warning his wife against making a mistake in the eyes of the world, he had unconsciously become agitated over what was the affair of her conscience, and was struggling against the barrier he fancied between them. "This is what I meant to say to you," he went on coldly and composedly, "and I beg you to listen to it. I consider jealousy, as you know, a humiliating and degrading feeling, and I shall never allow myself to be influenced by it. But there are certain rules of decorum which cannot be disregarded with impunity. This evening it was not I observed it, but judging by the impression made on the company, everyone observed that your conduct and deportment were not altogether what could be desired." "I positively don't understand," said Anna, shrugging her shoulders. He doesn't care, she thought. But other people noticed it, and that's what upsets him. "You're not well, Alexey Alexandrovitch," she added, and she got up and would have gone towards the door, but he moved forward as though he would stop her. His face was ugly and forbidding, as Anna had never seen him. She stopped, and bending her head back and on one side, began with her rapid hand taking out her hairpins. "Well, I'm listening to what's to come," she said calmly and ironically. "And indeed, I listen with interest, for I should like to understand what's the matter." She spoke, and marveled at the confident, calm, and natural tone in which she was speaking, and the choice of the words she used. "To enter into all the details of your feelings I have no right, and besides, I regard that as useless and even harmful," began Alexey Alexandrovitch. "Fretting in one's soul, one often ferrets out something that might have lain there unnoticed. Your feelings are an affair of your own conscience, but I am in duty bound to you, to myself, and to God, to point out to you your duties. Our life has been joined, not by man, but by God. That union can only be severed by a crime, and a crime of that nature brings its own chastisement. I don't understand a word, and oh dear, how sleepy I am. Unluckily," she said, rapidly passing her hand through her hair, feeling for the remaining hairpins. "Anna, for God's sake, don't speak like that," he said gently. "Perhaps I am mistaken, but believe me, what I say as much for myself as for you. I am your husband, and I love you." For an instant her face fell, and the mocking gleam in her eyes died away, but the word love threw her into revolt again. She thought, love? Can he love? If he hadn't heard there was such a thing as love, he would never have used the word. He doesn't even know what love is. "Alexey Alexandrovitch, really, I don't understand," she said. "Define what it is you find—" "Pardon. Let me say all I have to say. I love you, but I am not speaking of myself. The most important persons in this matter are our son and yourself." It may very well be, I repeat, that my words seem to you utterly unnecessary and out of place. It may be that they are called forth by my mistaken impression. In that case, I beg you to forgive me. But if you are conscious enough of even the smallest foundation for them, then I beg you to think a little. And if your heart prompts you, to speak out to me. Alexey Alexandrovitch was unconsciously saying something utterly unlike what he had prepared. I have nothing to say. And besides, she said hurriedly, with difficulty repressing a smile, it's really time to be in bed. Alexey Alexandrovitch sighed and, without saying more, went into the bedroom. When she came into the bedroom, he was already in bed. His lips were sternly compressed, and his eyes looked away from her. Anna got into her bed and lay expecting every minute that he would begin to speak to her again. She both feared his speaking and wished for it. But he was silent. She waited for a long while without moving, and had forgotten about him. She thought of what other. She pictured him and felt how her heart was flooded with emotion and guilty delight at the thought of him. Suddenly, she heard an even, tranquil snore. For the first instant, Alexey Alexandrovitch seemed, as it were, appalled at his own snoring, and ceased. But after an interval of 2 breathings, the snore sounded again, with a new, tranquil rhythm. "It's late, it's late," she whispered, with a smile. A long while she lay, not moving, with open eyes, whose brilliance she almost fancied she could herself see in the darkness. End of chapter 9. All right, chapter 9. Anna has made it back home, and she just has this glow about her. Like, you can tell that she had a great time. And so Alexei is like, all right, I know what I'm going to say. Here we go. And so he confronts her, but he doesn't really say quite what he's trying to say. And we're getting inner monologue from, or inner comments from Anna every once in a while, being like, oh, he speaks of love. He doesn't even know what love is. Like, if he had never even heard of that word, he would never even think that that's what is happening between us. And oh, like, he wouldn't have even noticed if I was with Vronsky had it not been for other people noticing. So he's more concerned about other people than he is about me. And this whole time, Anna is just trying to pretend like she knows that she's not doing anything wrong. But in doing that, Alexia is very easily able to find in her mannerisms that she knows that something is going on. So it's very much a like, I know, you know, and I know that you know, and you know that I know that you know. Like, that's what's happening. Just in like their like body language and like how they're phrasing different things. Yeah, the way that she's doing, or the way that she is talking to herself about it is like, oh, well, he doesn't know what that is. He he's not really concerned about me. He's only concerned about appearances. And so like she doesn't see it as like Alexei knows or thinks that he knows that something could happen in the future, and he is concerned for everybody, himself, Anna, and for their son. And it's not coming out quite the way that he wanted it to. Like, he practiced, he knew what he was going to say, but it's just not happening how he practiced it. Chapter 10. From that time, a new life began for Alexey Alexandrovitch and for his wife. Nothing special happened. Anna went out into society as she had always done, was particularly often at Princess Betsy's, and met Vronsky everywhere. Alexei Alexandrovitch saw this, but could do nothing. All his efforts to draw her into open discussion she confronted with a barrier which he could not penetrate, made up of a sort of amused perplexity. Outwardly, everything was the same, but their inner relations were completely changed. Alexei Alexandrovitch, a man of great power in the world of politics, felt himself helpless in this. Like an ox with head bent, submissively he awaited the blow which he felt was lifted over him. Every time he began to think about it, he felt that he must try once more, that by kindness, tenderness, and persuasion there was still hope of saving her, of bringing her back to herself, and every day he made ready to talk to her. He felt that the spirit of evil and deceit which had taken possession of her had possession of him too, and he talked to her in a tone quite unlike that in which he had meant to talk. Involuntarily, he talked to her in his habitual tone of jeering at anyone who should say what he was saying, and in that tone it was impossible to say what needed to be said to her. End of chapter 10. Short and sweet. Alexei is an ox. That was a great comparison. I think so too. I think so too. Also, I really appreciate the, like, he's so sure in his job and being who he is there, and he has no idea what he's doing at home in this situation. He's just floundering. Mm-hmm. And Anna, like, nothing has changed for Anna. She's still going out. She's hanging out with maybe more times than usual Princess Betsy because she knows that with Princess Betsy comes along Vronsky. So, cool. Chapter 11. That which for Vronsky had been almost a whole year, the one absorbing desire of his life, replacing all his old desires, that which for Anna had been an impossible, terrible, and even for that reason more entrancing dream of bliss, that desire had been fulfilled. He stood before her, pale, his lower jaw quivering, and besought her to be calm, not knowing how or why. Anna? Anna, he said with a choking voice. Anna, for pity's sake. But the louder he spoke, the lower she dropped her once proud and happy, now shame-stricken head, and she bowed down and sank from the sofa where she was sitting down on the floor, at his feet. She would have fallen on the carpet if he had not held her. My God, forgive me, she said, sobbing, pressing his hands to her bosom. She felt so sinful, so guilty, that nothing was left her but to humiliate herself and beg forgiveness. And as now there was no one in her life but him, to him she addressed her prayer for forgiveness. Looking at him, she had a physical sense of her humiliation, and she could say nothing more. He felt what a murderer must feel when he sees the body he has robbed of life. That body, robbed by him of life, was their love, the first stage of their love. There was something awful and revolting in the memory of what had been bought at this fearful price of shame. Shame at their spiritual nakedness crushed her and infected him. But in spite of all the murderer's horror before the body of his victim, he must hack it to pieces and hide the body, must use what he has gained by his murder. And with fury, as it were with passion, the murderer falls on the body and drags it and hacks at it. So he covered her face and shoulders with kisses. She held his hand and did not stir. Yes, these kisses, that is what has been bought by this shame. Yes, and one hand, which will always be mine, the hand of my accomplice. She lifted up that hand and kissed it. He sank on his knees and tried to see her face, but she hid it and said nothing. At last, as though making an effort over herself, she got up and pushed him away. Her face was still as beautiful, but it was only the more pitiful for that. "All is over," she said. "I have nothing but you. Remember that." "I can never forget what is my whole life. For one instant of this happiness, she said with horror and loathing, and her horror unconsciously infected him. "For pity's sake, not a word more." She rose quickly and moved away from him. "Not a word more," she repeated, and with a look of chill despair, incomprehensible to him, she parted from him. She felt that at that moment she could not put into words the sense of shame, of rapture, and of horror at this stepping into a new life, and she did not want to speak of it, to vulgarize this feeling by inappropriate words. But later, too, and the next day, and the third day, she still found no words in which she could express the complexity of her feelings. Indeed, she could not even find thoughts in which she could clearly think out all that was in her soul. She said to herself, "No, just now I can't think of it. Later on, when I am calmer." But this calm for thought never came. Every time the thought rose of what she had done and what would happen to her, and what she ought to do, a horror came over her, and she drove those thoughts away. "Later, later," she said, "when I am calmer." But in dreams, when she had no control over her thoughts, her position presented itself to her in all its hideous nakedness. One dream haunted her almost every night. She dreamed that both were her husbands at once, that both were lavishing caresses on her. Alexey Alexandrovitch was weeping, kissing her hands and saying, "How happy we are." And Alexey Vronsky was there too, and he too was her husband. And she was marveling that it had once seemed impossible to her, was explaining to them, laughing, that this was ever so much simpler, and that now both of them were happy and contented. But this dream weighed on her like a nightmare, and she awoke from it in terror. End of chapter 11. Ooh, okay, so we got some good, fun comparisons. Good and fun, meaning comparing their love to somebody being murdered. So good, so fun. You know, just girly things. Lots of murder chat. Yeah, and just like comparing it to like, yeah, a murderer and how like a murderer stands over the body of the victim and watching like the life drain from them and then hacking them to pieces. Like, this is a violent comparison, and I love it. I love that comparison. I think it's so great. And while it is like super, super violent, it is also like written in such a way that it's like you are like inserting or like imagining more violent, like it's not like a grotesque or like overly gory description of it. It's like almost matter of fact with like a little bit of um like the tiniest bit of emotion just in like how the word choices, but it's not gratuitous. I think it's really cool. I think it's really cool. And then like how Anna is like just like tormented between like wanting to be with Vronsky and for that to be okay, but also like still wanting the life with her husband. And like in her dreams, she is able to have both, and they are happy and she is happy. But then she wakes up realizing like, oh, that was a dream and that's not actually what's going on here. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Chapter 12. In the early days after his return from Moscow, whenever Lenin shuddered and grew red, remembering the disgrace of his rejection, he said to himself, "This was just how I used to shudder and blush, thinking myself utterly lost, when I was plucked in physics and did not get my remove, and how I thought myself utterly ruined after I had mismanaged that affair of my sister's that was entrusted to me. And yet, now that years have passed, I recall it and wonder that it could distress me so much. It will be the same thing, too, with this trouble. Time will go by, and I shall not mind about this either." But 3 months had passed, and he had not left off minding about it. And it was as painful for him to think of it as it had been those first days. He could not be at peace because, after dreaming so long of family life and feeling himself so ripe for it, he was still not married, and was further than ever from marriage. He was painfully conscious himself, as were all about him, that at his years it is not well for man to be alone. He remembered how before starting for Moscow he had once said to his cowman, Nikolai, a simple-hearted peasant whom he liked to talk to, "Well, Nikolai, I mean to get married," and how Nikolai had promptly answered, as a matter on which there could be no possible doubt, "And high time too, Konstantin Dmitrievitch." But marriage had now become farther off than ever. The place was taken, and whenever he tried to imagine any of the girls he knew in that place, he felt that it was utterly impossible. Moreover, the recollection of the rejection and the part he had played in the affair tortured him with shame. However often he told himself that he was in no wise to blame in it, that recollection, like other humiliating reminiscences of a similar kind, made him twinge and blush. There had been in his past, as in every man's, actions recognized by him as bad, for which his conscience ought to have tormented him. But the memory of these evil actions was far from causing him so much suffering as those trivial but humiliating reminiscences. These wounds never healed. And with these memories was now ranged his rejection and the pitiful position in which he must have appeared to others that evening. But time and work did their part. Bitter memories were more and more covered up by the incidents, paltry in his eyes but really important, of his country life. Every week he thought less often of Kitty. He was impatiently looking forward to the news that she was married, or just going to be married, hoping that such news would, like having a tooth out, completely cure him. Meanwhile, spring came on, beautiful and kindly, without the delays and treacheries of spring, one of those rare springs in which plants, beasts, and man rejoice alike. This lovely spring roused Levin still more, and strengthened him in his resolution of renouncing all his past and building up his lonely life firmly and independently. Though many of the plans with which he had returned to the country had not been carried out, still his most important resolution, that of purity, had been kept by him. He was free from that shame which had usually harassed him after a fall, and he could look everyone straight in the face. In February he had received a letter from Marya Nikolaevna, telling him that his brother Nikolai's health was getting worse, but that he would not take service, and in consequence of his letter, Levin went to Moscow to his brother's, and succeeded in persuading him to see a doctor, and to go to a watering place abroad. He succeeded so well in persuading his brother, and in lending him money for the journey without irritating him, that he was satisfied with himself in the matter. In addition to his farming, which called for special attention in spring, and in addition to reading, Levin had begun that winter to work on agriculture, the plan of which turned on taking into account the character of the laborer on the land as one of the unalterable data of the question, like the climate and the soil, and consequently deducing all the principles of scientific culture, not simply from the data of soil and climate, but from the data of soil, climate, and a certain unalterable character of the laborer. Thus, in spite of his solitude, or in consequence of his solitude, his life was exceedingly full. Only rarely he suffered from an unsatisfied desire to communicate his stray ideas to someone besides Agafea Mikhailovna. With her, indeed, he not infrequently fell into discussion upon physics, the theory of agriculture, and especially philosophy. Philosophy was Agafea Mikhailovna's favorite subject. Spring was slow in unfolding. For the last few weeks it had been steadily fine, frosty weather. In the daytime it thawed in the sun, but at night there were even 7 degrees of frost. There was such a frozen surface on the snow that they drove the wagons anywhere off the roads. Easter came in the snow. Then all of a sudden, on Easter Monday, a warm wind sprang up. Storm clouds swooped down, and for 3 days and 3 nights the warm, driving rain fell in streams. On Thursday the wind dropped, and a thick gray fog brooded over the land as though hiding the mysteries of the transformations that were being wrought in nature. Behind the fog there was the flowing of water, the cracking and floating of ice, the swift rush of turbid, foaming torrents, and on the following Monday, in the evening, the fog parted. The storm clouds split up into little curling crests of cloud. The sky cleared, and the real spring had come. In the morning the sun rose brilliant and quickly wore away the thin layer of ice that covered the water, and all the warm air was quivering with the steam that rose up from the quickened earth. The old grass looked greener, and the young grass thrust up its tiny blades. The buds of the guelder rose and of the currant and the sticky birch buds were swollen with sap, and an exploring bee was humming about the golden blossoms that studded the willow. Larks trilled unseen above the velvety green fields and the ice-covered stubble land. Peewits wailed over the lowlands and marshes flooded by the pools. Cranes and wild geese flew high across the sky, uttering their spring calls. The cattle, bald in patches where the new hair had not grown yet, lowed in the pastures. The bow-legged lambs frisked round their bleating mothers. Nimble children ran about the drying paths, covered with the prints of bare feet. There was a merry chatter of peasant women over their linen at the pond, and the ring of axes in the yard, where the peasants were repairing plows and harrows. The real spring had come. End of chapter 12. All right. We're back with Levin. Oh, hello, Levin. How you doing? We're back with Levin, and we also get passing of time. And in this passing of time, we are noticing the spring. It's beautiful, all of that. But also there is a mention, like, he was fully expecting to be married by now, to have married Kitty and have a wife and have the beginnings of a family. And he was so confident in leaving for Moscow that he told one of his workers that that's what was going to happen. He's like, when I come back, I'm going to be married. And it didn't happen. And there's a mention like, at this old age, it's weird for a man not to be married. But he is busying himself on the land with the, the livestock, all of that. He's also talking a lot with his house manager. So there is that. So a nice like reintroduction to Levin, and also like a nice little like there are things happening in Levin's life, but not too much. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Chapter 13. Levin put on his big boots and, for the first time, a cloth jacket instead of his fur cloak, and went out to look after his farm, stepping over streams of water that flashed in the sunshine and dazzled his eyes, and treading 1 minute on ice and the next into sticky mud. Spring is the time of plans and projects. And as he came out into the farmyard, Levin, like a tree in spring that knows not what form will be taken by the young shoots and twigs imprisoned in its swelling buds, hardly knew what undertakings he was going to begin upon now in the farm work that was so dear to him. But he felt that he was full of the most splendid plans and projects. First of all, he went to the cattle. The cows had been let out into their paddock, and their smooth sides were already shining with their new, sleek spring coats. They basked in the sunshine and lowed to go to the meadow. Levin gazed admiringly at the cows he knew so intimately to the minutest detail of their condition, and gave orders for them to be driven out into the meadow, and the calves to be let into the paddock. The herdsman ran happily to get ready for the meadow. The cow herd girls, picking up their petticoats, ran splashing through the mud with bare legs, still white, not yet brown from the sun, waving brushwood in their hands, chasing the calves that frolicked in the mirth of spring, and admiring the young ones of that year, who were particularly fine. The early calves were the size of a peasant's cow, and Pava's daughter, at 3 months old, was as big as a yearling. Levin gave orders for a trough to be brought out and for them to be fed in the paddock. But it appeared that as the paddock had not been used during the winter, the hurdles made in the autumn for it were broken. He sent for the carpenter, who, according to his orders, ought to have been at work at the thrashing machine, but it appeared that the carpenter was repairing the harrows, which ought to have been repaired before Lent. This was very annoying to Levin. It was annoying to come upon that everlasting slovenliness in the farm work against which he had been striving with all his might for so many years. The hurdles, as he ascertained, being not wanted in winter, had been carried to the cart horses' stable, and there broken, as they were of light construction, only meant for feeding calves. Moreover, it was apparent also that the harrows and all the agricultural implements which he had directed to be looked over and repaired in the winter, for which very purpose he had hired 3 carpenters, had not been put into repair, and the harrows were being repaired when they ought to have been harrowing the field. Levin sent for his bailiff, but immediately went off himself to look for him. The bailiff, beaming all over, like everyone that day, in a sheepskin bordered with astrachan, came out of the barn, twisting a bit of straw in his hands. "Why isn't the carpenter at the thrashing machine?" "Oh, I meant to tell you yesterday. The harrows, want repairing. Here it's time they got to work in the fields." "But what were they doing in the winter, then?" "But what did you want the carpenter for?" "Where are the hurdles for the calves' paddock?" "Oh, I ordered them to be got ready. What would you have with those peasants?" said the bailiff with a wave of his hand. "It's not those peasants, but this bailiff," said Levin, getting angry. "Why, what do I keep you for?" he cried. But, bethinking himself that this would not help matters, he stopped short in the middle of a sentence and merely sighed. Well, what do you say? Can sowing begin? He asked after a pause. Behind Turkin tomorrow, or the next day, they might begin. And the clover? I've sent Vasily and Mishka. They're sewing, only I don't know if they'll manage to get through. It's so slushy. How many acres? Well, about 15. Why not sow all? Cried Levin. That they were only sowing the clover on 15 acres, not all the 45, was still more annoying to him. Clover, as he knew, both from books and from his own experience, never did well except when it was sown as early as possible, almost in the snow. And yet, Levin could never get this done. There's no one to send. What would you have with such a set of peasants? 3 haven't turned up, and there's Semyon. Well, you should have taken some men from the thatching. And so I have. As it is. Where are the peasants then? 5 are making compote, which means compost. 4 are shifting the oats for fear of a touch of mildew, Konstantin Dmitrievitch. Levin knew very well that a touch of mildew meant that his English seed oats were already ruined. Again, they had not done as he had ordered. Why, but I told you during Lent to put in pipes, he cried. Don't put yourself out. We shall get it all done in time. Levin waved his hand angrily, went into the granary to glance at the oats, and then to the stable. The oats were not yet spoiled, but the peasants were carrying the oats in spades when they might simply let them slide down into the lower granary. And arranging for this to be done, and taking 2 workmen from there for sowing clover, Levin got over his vexation with the bailiff. Indeed, it was such a lovely day that one could not be angry. Ignat, he called to the coachman, who, with his sleeves tucked up, was washing the carriage wheels. Saddle me. Which, sir? Well, let it be Kolpik. Yes, sir. While they were saddling his horse, Levin again called up the bailiff, who was hanging about in sight, to make it up with him, and began talking to him about the spring operation before them, and his plans for the farm. The wagons were to begin carting manure earlier, so as to get all done before the early mowing, and the plowing of the further land to go on without a break, so as to let it ripen lying fallow, and the mowing to be all done by hired labor, not on half profits. The bailiff listened attentively, and obviously made an effort to approve of his employer's projects. But still, he had that look Levin knew so well that always irritated him, a look of hopelessness and despondency. That look said, "That's all very well, but as God wills." Nothing mortified Levin so much as that tone. But it was the tone common to all the bailiffs he had ever had. They had all taken up that attitude to his plans, and so now he was not angered by it, but mortified, and felt all the more roused to struggle against it, as it seemed. Elemental force continually raged against him, for which he could find no other expression than "as God wills." "If we can manage it, Konstantin Dmitrievitch," said the bailiff. "Why ever shouldn't you manage it?" "We positively must have another 15 laborers, and they don't turn up. There were some here today asking 70 roubles for the summer." Levin was silent. Again he was brought face to face with that opposing force. He knew that however much they tried, they could not hire more than 40, 37 perhaps, or 38 laborers for a reasonable sum. Some 40 had been taken on, and there were no more. But still he could not help struggling against it. Send to Surrey, to Chefirovska. If they don't come, we must look for them. Oh, I'll send, to be sure, said Fedorovitch despondently. But there are the horses, too. They're not good for much. We'll get some more. I know, of course, Levin added, laughing. You always want to do with as little and as poor quality as possible, but this year I'm not going to let you have things your own way. I'll see to everything myself. Why, I don't think you take much rest as it is. It cheers us up to work under the master's eye. So they're sowing clover behind the birchdale. I'll go and have a look at them, he said, getting on to the little bay cob, Kolpik, who was led up by the coachman. You can't get across the streams, Konstantin Dmitrievitch, the coachman shouted. All right, I'll go by the forest. And Levin rode through the slush of the farmyard to the gate and out into the open country. His good little horse, after his long inactivity, stepping out gallantly, snorting over the pools, and asking, as it were, for guidance. If Levin had felt happy before in the cattle pens and farmyard, he felt happier yet in the open country. Swaying rhythmically with the ambling paces of his good little cob, drinking in the warm yet fresh scent of the snow and the air as he rode through his forest over the crumbling, wasted snow, still left in parts, and covered with dissolving tracks, he rejoiced over every tree, with the moss reviving on its bark and the buds swelling on its shoots. When he came out of the forest in the immense plain before him, his grass fields stretched in an unbroken carpet of green, without one bare place or swamp, only spotted here and there in the hollows with patches of melting snow. He was not put out of temper even by the sight of the peasants' horses and colts trampling down his young grass. He told a peasant he meant to drive them out. Nor by the sarcastic and stupid reply of the peasant Ipot, whom he met on the way and said, Well, Ipot, should we soon be sowing? We must get the ploughing done first, Konstantin Dmitrievitch, answered Ipot. The further he rode, the happier he became, and plans for the land rose to his mind, each better than the last, to plant all his fields with hedges along the southern borders, so that the snow should not lie under them, to divide them up into 6 fields of arable and 3 of pasture and hay, to build a cattle yard at the further end of the estate, and to dig a pond, and to construct movable pens for the cattle as a means of manuring the land. And then 800 acres of wheat, 300 of potatoes, and 400 of clover, and not 1 acre exhausted. Absorbed in such dreams, carefully keeping his horse by the hedges, so as not to trample his young crops, he rode up to the laborers who had been sent to sow clover. A cart with the seed in it was standing not at the edge, but in the middle of the crop, and the winter corn had been torn up by the wheels and trampled by the horse. Both the laborers were sitting in the hedge, probably smoking a pipe together. The earth in the cart, with which the seed was mixed, was not crushed to powder, but crusted together or adhering in clods. Seeing the master, the laborer, Vasily went towards the cart, while Mishka set to work sewing. This was not as it should be, but with the laborers Levin seldom lost his temper. When Vasily came up, Levin told him to lead the horse to the hedge. It's all right, sir. It'll spring up again, responded Vasily. Please, don't argue, said Levin, but do as you're told. Yes, sir, answered Vasily, and he took the horse's head. What is sewing, Konstantin Dmitrievitch? He said, hesitating. First rate, only it's a work to get about. You drag a ton of earth on your shoes." "Why is it you have earth that's not sifted?" asked Levin. "Well, we crumble it up," answered Vasily, taking up some seed and rolling the earth in his palm. Vasily was not to blame for their having filled up his cart and with unsifted earth, but still it was annoying. Levin had more than once already tried a way he knew what for stifling his anger and turning all that seemed dark right again. And he tried that way now. He watched how Mishka strode along, swinging the huge clods of earth that clung to each foot, and getting off his horse, he took the sieve from Vasily and started sowing himself. "Where did you stop?" Vasily pointed to the mark with his foot, and Levin went forward as best he could, scattering the seed on the land. Walking was as difficult as on a bog, and by the time Levin had ended the row he was in a great heat, and he stopped and gave up the sieve to Vasily. "Well, master, when summer's here, mind you don't scold me for these rows," said Vasily. "Eh?" said Levin cheerily, already feeling the effect of his method. "Why, you'll see in the summertime. It'll look different. Look you where I sowed last spring, how I did work at it. I do my best, Konstantin Dmitrievitch, d'ye see, as I would for my own father. I don't like bad work myself, nor would I let another man do it. What's good for the master's good for us too. To look out yonder now," said Vasily, pointing. "It does one heart good. It's a lovely spring, Vasily. Why, it's a spring such as the old men don't remember the like of. I was up home. An old man up there has sown wheat, too. About an acre of it. He was saying you wouldn't know it from rye." "Have you been sowing wheat long?" "Why, sir, it was you taught us the year before last. You gave me 2 measures. We sold about 8 bushels and sowed a rood." "Well, mind you crumble up the clods," said Levin, going towards his horse, "and keep an eye on Mishka. And if there is a good crop you shall have half a ruble for every acre." "Humbly thankful. We are very well content, sir, as it is." Levin got on his horse and rode towards the field where was last year's clover, and the one which was plowed, ready for the spring corn. The crop of clover coming up in the stubble was magnificent. It had survived everything and stood up vividly green through the broken stalks of last year's wheat. The horse sank in up to the pasterns, and he drew each hoof with a sucking sound out of the half-thawed ground. Over the plowland riding was utterly impossible. The horse could only keep a foothold where there was ice, and in the thawing furrows he sank deep in at each step. The plowland was in splendid condition. In a couple of days it would be fit for harrowing and sowing. Everything was capital. Everything was cheering. Levin rode back across the streams, hoping the water would have gone down, and he did in fact get across, and startled 2 ducks. There must be snipe too, he thought, and just as he reached the turning homewards he met the forest keeper, who confirmed his theory about the snipe. Levin went home at a trot, so as to have time to eat his dinner and get his gun ready for the evening. End of chapter 13. All right, so chapter 13, we're still with Levin, and it is more of like a slice of life. It's now springtime, and so it is time to start planting and getting the land ready for, harvesting and all of that. But he's like having issues because he's been gone, so he wasn't able to be the one to push everybody to do the things that they have to do when there is a lull in the season, winter. And so like people are fixing machines that should have already been fixed, and people are like just being a little bit behind, and he's worried about seeds succumbing to mildew and all of these things. And so he's going around and talking to people, and it's like, well, why haven't you done this? What's going on? And people are like, look, we might be a little behind, but we're doing okay. And he eventually, like, he gets mad at the bailiff, but eventually he is okay with everything. He's like, yeah, I guess you're right. It's like a normal, this is fine. Everything will be okay. And so he goes out and he meets Mishka and Vasily, and like they're planting things out there, and he decides to, help a little bit. And I think it's funny that like one of the workers is like, so just so you remember, you did this section. And Levin's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, it's gonna look different than how I do things. Just so you know, it will be different. And Levin is like, oh, I see. Okay, cool. And so it's just a farm life. It's just the beginnings of farm life. And something that I like that Levin talks about is how spring is just so full of possibilities and plans and projects, and now is the time to get ready for the future. And it's great. Exactly. The worker just doesn't want to get blamed for your terrible job. Levin, you're doing a terrible job, and let me remind you that the job, it's going to look bad this section. And just remember that you did this section, not me, okay? So don't like fire me or don't not pay me. That's funny. And that's where we ended. Chapter 14. As he rode up to the house in the happiest frame of mind, Levin heard the bell ring at the side of the principal entrance of the house. Yes, that's someone from the railway station, he thought. Just the time to be here from the Moscow train. Who could it be? What if it's Brother Nikolay? He said. Maybe I'll go down to the waters, or maybe I'll come down to you. He felt dismayed and vexed for the first minute that his brother Nikolay's presence should come to disturb his happy mood of spring. But he felt ashamed of the feeling, and at first he opened, as it were, the arms of his soul, and with a softened feeling of joy and expectation, now he hoped with all his heart that it was his brother. He pricked up his horse, and riding out from behind the acacias, he saw a hired 3-horse sledge from the railway station, and a gentleman in a fur coat. It was not his brother. Oh, if it were only some nice person one could talk to a little, he thought. Ugh! Cried Levin joyfully, flinging up both his hands. Here's a delightful visitor. Oh, how glad I am to see you, he shouted, recognizing Stepan Arkadyevitch. I shall find out for certain whether she's married or when she's going to be married, he thought. And on that delicious spring day he felt that the thought of her did not hurt him at all. Well, you didn't expect me, eh? Said Stepan Arkadyevitch, getting out of the sledge, splashed with mud on the bridge of his nose, on his cheek, and on his eyebrows, but radiant with health and good spirits. I've come to see you in the first place, he said, embracing and kissing him, to have some stand shooting second, and to sell the forest at Ergoshovo third. Delightful. What a spring we're having. However did you get along in the sledge? In a cart. It would have been worse still, Konstantin Dmitrievitch, answered the driver, who knew. Well, I'm very, very glad to see you, said Levin, with a genuine smile of childlike delight. Levin led his friend to the room set apart for visitors, where Stepan Arkadyevitch's things were carried also: a bag, a gun in a case, a satchel, 4 cigars. Leaving him there to wash and change his clothes, Levin went off to the counting-house to speak about the ploughing and clover. Agafea Mikhailovna, always very anxious for the credit of the house, met him in the hall with inquiries about dinner. Do just as you like, only let it be as soon as possible, he said, and went to the bailiff. When he came back, Stepan Arkadyevitch washed and combed, came out of his room with a beaming smile, and they went upstairs together. Well, I am glad I managed to get away to you. Now I shall understand what the mysterious business is that you are always absorbed in here. No, really, I envy you. What a house! How nice it all is, so bright, so cheerful, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, forgetting that it was not always spring and fine weather like that day. And your nurse is simply charming. A pretty maid in an apron might be even more agreeable, perhaps, but for your severe monastic style, it does very well. Stepan Arkadyevitch told him many interesting pieces of news. Especially interesting to Levin was the news that his brother, Sergei Ivanovitch, was intending to pay him a visit in the summer. Not one word did Stepan Arkadyevitch say in reference to Kitty and the Shtcherbatskoys. He merely gave him greetings from his wife. Levin was grateful to him for his delicacy and was very glad of his visitor. He always happened with him during his solitude. A mass of ideas and feelings had been accumulating within him, which he could not communicate to those about him. And now he poured out upon Stepan Arkadyevitch his poetic joy in the spring, and his failures and plans for the land, and his thoughts and criticisms on the books he had been reading, and the idea of his own book, the basis of which really was, though he was unaware of it himself, a criticism of all the old books on agriculture. Stepan Arkadyevitch, always charming, understanding everything at the slightest reference, was particularly charming on this visit, and Levin noticed in him a special tenderness, as it were, and a new tone of respect that flattered him. The efforts of Agafea Mikhailovna and the cook that the dinner should be particularly good only ended in the two famished friends attacking the preliminary course, eating a great deal of bread and butter, salt goose and salted mushrooms, and in Levin's finally ordering the soup to be served without the accompaniment of little pies, with which the cook had particularly meant to impress their visitor. But though Stepan Arkadyevitch was accustomed to very different dinners, he thought everything excellent. The herb brandy, and the bread, and the butter, and above all the salt goose and the mushrooms, and the nettle soup, and the chicken in white sauce, and the white Crimean wine, everything was superb and delicious. Splendid, splendid, he said, lighting a fat cigar after the roast. I feel as if, coming to you, I had landed on a peaceful shore after the noise and jolting of a steamer. And so you maintain that the laborer himself is an element to be studied and to regulate the choice of methods in agriculture. Of course, I'm an ignorant outsider, but I should fancy theory and its application will have its influence on the laborer, too. Yes, but wait a bit. I'm not talking of political economy, I'm talking of the science of agriculture. It ought to be like the natural sciences, and to observe given phenomena, and the laborer in its economic ethnograph, ethnographical, ethnographical. There we go. We would get there eventually. At that instant, Agafea Mikhailovna came in with jam. Oh, Agafea Mikhailovna, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, kissing the tips of his plump fingers. What salt goose! What herb brandy! What do you think? Isn't it time to start, Kostya? He added. Levin looked out the window at the sun sinking behind the bare treetops of the forest. Yes, it's time, he said. Kuzma, get ready the trap. And he ran downstairs. Stepan Arkadyevitch, going down, carefully took the canvas cover of his varnished gun case with his own hands, and opening it, began to get ready his expensive, new-fashioned gun. Kuzma was already scented. A big tip never left Stepan Arkadyevitch's side, and put on him both his stockings and boots, a task which Stepan Arkadyevitch readily left him. Kostya, give orders that if the merchant Ryabinin comes, I told him to come today. He's to be brought in and to wait for me. Why? Do you mean to say you're selling the forest to Ryabinin? Yes. Do you know him? To be sure I do. I have had to do business with him, positively and conclusively. Stepan Arkadyevitch laughed. Positively and conclusively were the merchant's favorite words. Yes, it's wonderfully funny the way he talks. She never knows where her master's going, he added, patting Laska, who hung about Levin whining and licking his hands, his boots, and his gun. The trap was already at the steps when they went out. I told them to bring the trap round. Or would you rather walk? No, we'd better drive, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, getting into the trap. He sat down, tucked the tiger-skin rug round him, and lighted a cigar. How is it you don't smoke? A cigar is a sort of thing, not exactly a pleasure, but the crown and outward sign of pleasure. Come, this is life. How splendid it is. This is how I should like to live. Why? Who prevents you? Said Levin, smiling. No, you're a lucky man. You've got everything you like. You like horses, and you've got 'em. Dogs, you have 'em. Shooting, you have it. Farming, you have it. Perhaps because I rejoice in what I have and don't fret for what I haven't, said Levin, thinking of Kitty. Stepan Arkadyevitch comprehended, looking at him, but said nothing. Levin was grateful to Oblonsky for noticing, with his never-failing tact, that he dreaded conversation about the Shtcherbatskoys, and so saying nothing about them. But now Levin was longing to find out what was tormenting him so, yet he did not have the courage to begin. Come, tell me how things are going with you, said Levin, bethinking himself that it was not nice of him to think only of himself. Stepan Arkadyevitch's eyes sparkled merrily. You don't admit, I know, that one can be fond of new rolls when one has had one's rations of bread. But to your mind, it's a crime. But I don't count life as life without love, he said, taking Levin's question his own way. What am I going to do? I'm made that way, and really, one does so little harm to anyone and gives oneself so much pleasure. What? Is there something new, then? Queried Levin. Yes, my boy, there is. There. Do you see? You know the type of Ossian's women. Women, such as one sees in dreams. Well, these women are sometimes to be met in reality. And these women are terrible. Women, don't you know, is such a subject that however much you study it, it's always perfectly new. Well, then, it would be better not to study it. No. Some mathematician has said that enjoyment lies in the search for truth, not in the finding of it. Levin listened in silence, and in spite of all the efforts he made, he could not in the least enter into the feelings of his friend and understand his sentiments and the charm of studying such women. End of chapter 14. We have a visitor. Stepan Arkadyevitch, our very first character that we met, has come to visit Levin out in the country. I have suspicions that he is not here for the things that he said that he's here for. I have suspicions that he's here for something else. Whether to, hide from his wife or to just get distance from, the situation that he has sown himself. Or maybe he is just wanting to visit Levin. But he's there. So now we get the other side of like how Levin is living. So Levin spent time in Moscow, and we got to have a dinner with on Stepan's terms. There we go. And now we're having dinner on Levin's terms. And Stepan, even though it's very, very different from what he usually eats, which we know he ordered like 3 dozen or 4 dozen oysters, whatever, he loves this dinner, and he loves the herb brandy and all of these things. And now they're going to go shooting. And they're just talking, and Levin so desperately wants to know about Kitty, like if she's married or if there's plans for her to be married, but he doesn't want to ask. And Stepan Arkadyevich is being such a good friend that he hasn't just brought it up because he doesn't want to like upset Levin. So like they're both like, "Do you want to know? No, you don't want to know. Okay, do I want to know? I don't know if I want to know." So it's just like this back and forth that I think is funny. Chapter 15. The place fixed on for the stand shooting was not far above a stream in a little aspen copse. On reaching the copse, Levin got out of the trap and led Oblonsky to a corner of a mossy, swampy glade, already quite free from snow. He went back himself to a double birch tree on the other side, and leaning his gun on the fork of a dead lower branch, he took off his full overcoat, fastened his belt again, and worked his arms to see if they were free. Gray old Laska, who had followed them, sat down warily opposite him and pricked up her ears. The sun was setting behind a thick forest, and in the glow of sunset the birch trees, dotted about in the aspen copse, stood out clearly with their hanging twigs and their buds swollen almost to bursting. From the thickest part of the copse, where the snow still remained, came the faint sound of narrow, winding threads of water running away. Tiny birds twittered, and now and then fluttered from tree to tree. In the pauses of complete stillness there came the rustle of last year's leaves, stirred by the gnawing of the earth and the growth of the grass. Imagine, one can hear and see the grass growing, Levin said to himself, noticing a wet, slate color aspen leaf moving beside a blade of young grass. He stood, listened, and gazed sometimes down at the wet, mossy ground, sometimes at Laska, listening all alert, sometimes at the sea of bare tree-tops that stretched on the slope below him, sometimes at the darkening sky, covered with white streaks of cloud. A hawk flew high over a forest far away with slow sweep of its wings. Another flew with exactly the same motion in the same direction and vanished. The birds twittered more and more loudly and busily in the thicket. An owl hooted not far off, and Laska, starting, stepped cautiously a few steps forward, and putting her head on one side, began to listen intently. Beyond the stream was heard the cuckoo. Twice she uttered her usual cuckoo call, and then gave a hoarse, hurried call, and broke down. "Imagine! The cuckoo already!" said Stepan Arkadyevitch, coming out from behind the bush. "Yes, I hear it," answered Levin, reluctantly breaking the stillness with his voice, which now sounded disagreeable to himself. "Now it's coming." Stepan Arkadyevitch's figure again went behind the bush, and Levin saw nothing but the bright flash of a match, followed by the red glow and blue smoke of a cigarette. "Tch, tch," came the snapping sound of Stepan Arkadyevitch cocking his gun. "What's that cry?" asked Oblonsky, drawing Levin's attention to a prolonged cry, as though a colt were whinnying in a high voice in play. "Oh, don't you know it? That's the hare. But enough talking. Listen, it's flying," almost shrieked Levin, cocking his gun. They heard a shrill whistle in the distance, and in the exact time so well known to the sportsman, 2 seconds later, a third. And after the third whistle, the hoarse, guttural cry could be heard. Levin looked about him to right and to left, and there, just facing him against the dusky blue sky above the confused mass of tender shoots of the aspen, he saw the flying bird. It was flying straight towards him. The guttural cry, like the even tearing of some strong stuff, sounded close to his ear. The long beak and neck of the bird could be seen, and at the very instant when Levin was taking aim, behind the bush where Oblonsky stood, there was a flash of red lightning. The bird dropped like an arrow and darted upwards again. Again came the red flash and the sound of a blow, and fluttering its wings as though trying to keep up in the air, the bird halted, stopped still an instant, and fell with a heavy splash on the slushy ground. "Can I have missed?" shouted Stepan Arkadyevitch, who could not see for the smoke. "Here it is," said Levin, pointing to Laska, who, with one ear raised, wagging the end of her shaggy tail, came slowly back, as though she would prolong the pleasure, and as it were smiling, brought the dead bird to her master. "Well, I'm glad you were successful," said Levin, who at the same time had a sense of envy that he had not succeeded in shooting the snipe. "It was a bad shot from the right barrel," responded Stepan Arkadyevitch, loading his gun. "Shh! It's flying." The shrill whistles, rapidly following one another, were heard again. Two snipe, playing and chasing one another, the only whistling, not crying, flew straight at the very heads of the sportsmen. There was the report of 4 shots, and like swallows the snipe turned swift somersaults in the air and vanished from sight. The stand shooting was capital. Stepan Arkadyevitch shot 2 more birds, and Levin 2, of which one was not found. It began to get dark. Venus, bright and silvery, shone with her soft light low down in the west behind the birch trees, and high up in the east twinkled the red lights of Arcturus. Over his head, Levin made out the stars of the Great Bear and lost them again. The snipe had ceased flying, but Levin resolved to stay a little longer, till Venus, which he saw below a branch of birch, should be above it, and the stars of the Great Bear should be perfectly plain. Great Venus had risen above the branch, and the ear of the Great Bear with its shaft was now all plainly visible against the dark blue sky. Yet, still, he waited. "Isn't it time to go home?" said Stepan Arkadyevitch. It was quite still now in the copse, and not a bird was stirring. "Let's stay a little while," answered Levin. "As you like." They were standing now about 15 paces from one another. "Stiva," said Levin unexpectedly, "how is it you don't tell me whether your sister-in-law's married yet, or when she's going to be?" Levin felt so resolute and serene that no answer, he fancied, could affect him. But he had never dreamed of what Stepan Arkadyevitch replied. "She's never thought of being married, and isn't thinking of it, but she's very ill, and the doctors have sent her abroad. They're positively afraid she may not live." "What?" cried Levin. "Very ill? What is wrong with her? How has she—" While they were saying this, Laska, with ears pricked up, was looking upwards at the sky and reproachfully at them. "They have chosen a time to talk," she was thinking. "It's on the wing. Here it is. Yes, it is. They'll miss it," thought Laska. But at that very instant both suddenly heard a shrill whistle which, as it were, smote on their ears, and both suddenly seized their guns, and 2 flashes gleamed, and 2 bangs sounded at the very same instant. The snipe, flying high above, instantly folded its wings and fell into a thicket, bending down the delicate shoots. "Splendid! Together!" cried Levin, and he ran with Laska into the thicket to look for the snipe. Oh, yes. What was it that was unpleasant? He wondered. Yes, Kitty's ill. Well, can't be helped. I'm very sorry. "She's found it. Isn't she a clever thing?" he said, taking the warm bird from Laska's mouth and packing it into the almost full game bag. "I've got it, Stiva," he shouted. End of chapter 15. Okay, so they're out hunting. They're shooting snipes, which apparently is a real thing. And this whole time, Levin has been trying to figure out how to ask about Kitty, and then he just sort of blurts it out. He's just like, are you gonna tell me about Kitty or not? Like, why? Why didn't you tell me? And Stefan's like, oh yeah, no, she's not getting married. She hasn't even thought about getting married, but she's very sick and she's gonna go abroad. She might die. And it's like, what? Like, Levin was not expecting that answer at all. At all, at all. He was prepared to be like, oh, she is getting married tomorrow, or oh, she's already married, or oh, she's already pregnant, like something along those lines. But not that she hasn't even gotten married, doesn't really want to get married, and might die. Hmm. Hmm. It felt like an abrupt ending. Yeah, it did. And it's also interesting that, like, we got the thoughts of the dog that's with them, Laska. Like, that's weird. We haven't had any animal thoughts before now, but here we are with some animal thinking. Chapter 16. On the way home, Levin asked all details of Kitty's illness and the Sherbatskoys' plans, and though he would have been ashamed to admit it, he was pleased at what he heard. He was pleased that there was still hope, and still more pleased that she should be suffering who had made him suffer so much. But when Stepan Arkadyevitch began to speak of the causes of Kitty's illness and mentioned Vronsky's name, Levin cut him off. I have no right whatever to know family matters, and, to tell the truth, no interest in them either. Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled hardly perceptibly, catching the instantaneous change he knew so well in Levin's face, which had become as gloomy as it had been bright a minute before. Have you quite settled about the forest with Ryabinin? Asked Levin. Yes, it's settled. The price is magnificent. 38,000. 8 straight away and the rest in 6 years. I've been bothered about it for ever so long. No one would give more. Then you've as good as given away your forest for nothing, said Levin gloomily. How do you mean for nothing? Said Stepan Arkadyevitch with a good-humored smile, knowing that nothing would be right in Levin's eyes now. Because the forest is worth at least 150 rubles the acre, answered Levin. Ugh, these farmers, said Stepan Arkadyevitch playfully. Your tone of contempt for us poor townfolk. But when it comes to business, we do it better than anyone. I assure you I have reckoned it all out, he said, and the forest is fetching a very good price, so much so that I'm afraid of this fellow's crying off, in fact. You know it's not timber, said Stepan Arkadyevitch, hoping by this distinction to convince Levin completely of the unfairness of his doubts. And it won't run to more than 25 yards per acre, and he's giving me at the rate of 70 rubles the acre. Levin smiled contemptuously. I know, he thought, that fashion not only in him, but in all city people who, after being twice in 10 years in the country, pick up 2 or 3 phrases and use them in season and out of season, firmly persuaded that they know all about it. Timber, run to so many yards the acre. He says these words without understanding them himself. I wouldn't attempt to teach you what you write about in your office, said he, and if need arose, I should come to you and ask about it, but you're so positive you know all the lore of the forest. It's difficult. Have you counted the trees? How count the trees? Said Stepan Arkadyevitch, laughing, still trying to draw his friend out of his ill temper. Count the sands of the sea? Number the stars? Some higher power might do it. Oh, well, the higher power of Ryabinin can. Not a single merchant ever buys a forest without counting the trees, unless they get it given them for nothing, as you're doing now. I know your forest. I go there every year shooting, and your forest is worth 150 rubles an acre paid down, while he's giving you 60 by installments, so that, in fact, you are making him a present of 30,000. Come, don't let your imagination run away with you, said Stepan Arkadyevitch piteously. Why was it none would give it then? Why, because he has an understanding with the merchants. He's bought them off. I've had to do with all of them. I know them. They're not merchants, you know. They're speculators. He wouldn't look at a bargain that gave him 10, 15% profit, but holds back to buy a ruble's worth for 20 kopecks. Well, enough of it. You're out of temper. Not the least, said Levin gloomily, as they drove up to the house. At the steps there stood a trap tightly covered with iron and leather, with a sleek horse tightly harnessed with broad collar straps. In the trap sat the chubby, tightly belted clerk who served Ryabinin as coachman. Ryabinin himself was already in the house and met the friends in the hall. Ryabinin was a tall, thinnish, middle-aged man with mustache and a projecting, clean-shaven chin and prominent, muddy-looking eyes. He was dressed in a long-skirted blue coat with buttons below the waist at the back and wore high boots wrinkled over the ankles and straight over the calf, with big galoshes drawn over them. He rubbed his face with his handkerchief, and wrapping round him his coat, which sat extremely well as it was, he greeted them with a smile, holding out his hand to Stepan Arkadyevitch, as though he wanted to catch something. "So here you are," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, giving him his hand. "That's capital." I did not venture to disregard your Excellency's commands, though the road was extremely bad. I positively walked the whole way, but I am here at my time. Konstantin Dmitrievitch, my respects." He turned to Levin, trying to seize his hand too, but Levin, scowling, made as though he did not notice his hand and took out the snipe. "Your honors have been diverting yourselves with the chase. What kind of bird may it be, pray?" added Ryabinin, looking contemptuously at the snipe. "A great delicacy, I suppose." And he shook his head disapprovingly, as though he had grave doubts whether this game were worth the candle. "Would you like to go into my study?" Levin asked, in French, to Stepan Arkadyevitch, scowling morosely. "Go into my study. You can talk there." "Quite so. Where you please," said Ryabinin with contemptuous dignity, as though wishing to make it felt that others might be in difficulties as to how to behave, but that he could never be in any difficulty about anything. On entering the study, Ryabinin looked about, as his habit was, as though seeking the holy picture, but when he had found it, he did not cross himself. He scanned the bookcases and bookshelves, and with the same dubious air with which he had regarded the snipe, he smiled contemptuously and shook his head disapprovingly, as though by no means willing to allow that this game were worth the candle. "Well, have you brought the money?" asked Oblonsky. "Sit down." "Oh, don't trouble about the money. I've come to see you to talk it over." "What is there to talk over? But do sit down." "Don't mind if I do," said Ryabinin, sitting down and leaning his elbows on the back of his chair in a position of intensest discomfort to himself. "You must knock it down a bit, Prince. It would be too bad. The money is ready conclusively to the last farthing. As to paying the money down, there'll be no hitch there." Levin, who had meanwhile been putting his gun away in the cupboard, was just going out the door, but catching the merchant's words, he stopped. "Why, you've got the forest for nothing as it is," he said. "He came to me too late, or I'd have fixed the price for him." Ryabinin got up, and in silence, with a smile, he looked Levin down and up. "Very close about money is Konstantin Dmitrievitch," he said with a smile, turning to Stepan Arkadyevitch. "There's positively no dealing with him. I was bargaining for some wheat of him, and a pretty price I offered, too." Why should I give you my goods for nothing? I didn't pick it up on the ground, nor steal it, either. Mercy on us. Nowadays, there's no chance at all of stealing, with the open courts and everything done in style. Nowadays, there's no question of stealing. We are just talking things over, like gentlemen. His Excellency is asking too much for the forest. I can't make both ends meet over it. I must ask for a little concession. But is the thing settled between you or not? If it's settled, it's useless haggling, but if it's not, said Levin, I'll buy the forest. The smile vanished at once from Raibanin's face. A hawk-like, greedy, cruel expression was left upon it. With rapid, bony fingers, he unbuttoned his coat, revealing a shirt, bronze waistcoat buttons, and a watch chain, and quickly pulled out a fat, old pocketbook. Here you are. The forest is mine, said he, crossing himself quickly and holding out his hand. Take the money. It's my forest. That's Raibanin's way of doing business. Doesn't haggle over every halfpenny, he added, scowling and waving the pocketbook. I wouldn't be in a hurry if I were you, said Levin. Come, really, said Oblonsky in surprise. I've given my word, you know. Levin went out of the room, slamming the door. Raibanin looked towards the door and shook his head with a smile. It's all youthfulness. Positively nothing but boyishness. Why, I'm buying it upon my honor. Simply believe me, for the glory of it, that Raibanin and no one else should have bought the copse of Oblonsky. And as to the profits, why, I must make what God gives, in God's name, if you would kindly sign the title deed. Within an hour, the merchant, stroking his big overcoat neatly down and hooking up his jacket with the agreement in his pocket, seated himself in his tightly covered trap and drove homewards. Ugh, these gentlefolk, he said to the clerk. They're a nice lot. That's so, responded the clerk, handing him the reins and buttoning the leather apron. But I can congratulate you on the purchase, Michael Ignatitch. Well, well. End of chapter 16. All right, chapter 16. Stepan Arkadyevich tells Levin that he has sold the forest, and he tells him exactly how he has sold it. He has a down payment, and then he's going to get payments throughout the next 6 years. And Levin is like, you buffoon. The forest is worth way more than that. You are basically giving him $30,000 and a forest. And Stepan is like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just a forest. And Levin goes on to be like, well, did you count every tree? He's like, no, why would I count every tree? And it's like, that's the difference between merchants and people who know forests. And so they're going back and forth. And then the person who has bought the forest is coming, is here, has arrived, and is like, well, you know, there's like a little thing. And he's about to like start haggling the price down even further. And Levin steps in and is like, well, are you going to buy it? Like, if it's a done deal, then it's yours. But if it's not, then I want to buy it. Because he knows how valuable the land is. And so does Ryvan. He gets that look and is just like, no, 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 it's settled, everything's fine, I'm going to buy it right now. And so he buys it. That's going to be it for tonight. Thank you all so much. I am still enjoying this book. I'm loving it. I know the safe place. It's crumbling right before your very eyes. I'm still really enjoying this book. I love Tolstoy's writing. I love the tiny little details that he inserts in scenes, but then in also like giving us little snippets of how people are even like talking to themselves. And it is just masterful. Masterful. I think this book might catch on. I think this book might get a little popular. That's going to be it for tonight. It is a pleasure, as always, whether you lurk, whether you chat. I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support.